Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft just dropped to the general public, including yours truly, and I've spent a couple days pouring through the options. Rather than pack it into one or two longer videos, I've decided to do some focused content, going through the character building options and some analysis of these things individually. I've decided to start with subclasses, and today let's pour through the College of Spirits Bard. Now, thematically, this bard is a storyteller, or fortune teller, perhaps, weaving their power through the stories they tell. I kind of like the thematics here. I mean, it's about time we had a storytelling bard. I have certainly done this concept before, but never had the mechanics to support that concept. And I think this concept works just fine for a non-horror campaign. Because a lot of stuff in this book is really geared towards the horror setting, and I definitely think a storyteller works well in that kind of campaign. But in this case, I think it is something that works just fine in any campaign. So when we get into the features, at third level we get 3 different features. This isn't the standard. Usually you get 2 features at level 3 with Bard subclasses. But as we go through these, they are probably less potent than other subclass features, so maybe that's why the extra. The first one is Guiding Whispers. This gives us the guidance cantrip for free, and it allows us to cast it with a range of 60 feet. Guidance is normally a touch spell. So this is just a free cantrip. But there are some things to note. First, guidance is one of the best cantrips in the game. Second, it's normally not available to bards. Third, it's actually a very good fit for bards, as it does actually complement inspiration. That said, it's still a cantrip, and guidance is one of those cantrips that you really want at least one person in your group to have, but each additional character with it adds less value. So this is really only a valuable feature if nobody else has that cantrip. And it's not that rare, as it's on the Artificer, Cleric, and Druid spell lists. Now, the question is how much value is added from the range of 60 feet. I honestly don't see a lot of value here. Usually guidance is something you cast out of combat, and in most out-of-combat scenarios, a range of touch really isn't a big problem. I don't think it's useless to have the range. For example, let's say you have a party member or maybe a pet scouting ahead. You give them guidance, which they use on an ability check. You can then replace the guidance without venturing forward. This is pretty niche, though. I generally think the 60-foot range isn't going to come up very often. So, Guiding Whispers, I think, is okay. I think it has fair value if your party doesn't already have access to the guidance cantrip, and mediocre value if it does. The second feature at third level is Spiritual Focus. This allows you to use some thematically appropriate items, like a crystal ball or a spirit board, as your spellcasting focus. And if you cast a bard spell that deals damage or restores hit points through the focus, you add a d6 to the damage or healing roll. This one sounds a lot better than it actually is. The first thing to point out is that bards actually don't have a lot of spells on their list that deal damage. There's a few, but it's really not the focus of their options. The second, and much bigger problem, is that the feature specifies some limitations that are severe. First, the spell requires a roll, so no adding to aid spells, for example. Secondly, the spell must be cast through the focus. This one is really bad, because it means the spell requires a material component, and one that isn't consumed or costly. This really narrows down our options a lot. For healing, this is dismal. We really can't add this to any healing spells except Regenerate, which is a 7th level spell that's probably more about replacing lost body parts than actually healing damage, and It's also probably not a spell that a bard is likely to select, even if they get a d6 bonus. So we are left with a feature where one entire half of it is basically useless. The adding to damage is a bit better, but it's still limited to a small number of spells. And no cantrips, by the way. Throwing it on a shatter at 3rd level is going to be decent, so I'm going to stop short of calling this feature useless, but it's really not a good feature at all. I expect most tables are going to run it that as long as you are holding the focus, the d6 will add to any bard spell with a damage or healing roll. This is the way the feature should have been written, and it turns it into a decent feature. Still not overly powerful, but okay. But as written, this is a poor feature. The 3rd level 3 feature is going to be the iconic feature of this subclass, and we'll go over this one in a lot more detail, and that's called Tales from Beyond, which gives the College of Spirits Bard another way to use their inspiration. This is standard for Bard subclasses. They either give you a new way to use your inspiration, or the inspiration itself is more potent. In this case, we use our inspiration as a bonus action, and then we roll on the Spirit Tales table. This is going to give us a random use for inspiration based on the number rolled. The table goes to 12, but we're using our Bardic Inspiration die for the roll, so the higher results are only possible with a higher level Bard. At level 3, we're going to be using a d6. This isn't a big problem though, because I noticed that some of my favorite features here come early on the list. Once this is rolled, we can use an action to apply the effect to a creature, and unlike regular Bardic Inspiration, this can be used on ourselves. So generally, I don't like features where you roll on a table and then something random happens. In this case, I think this works okay. Certainly better than other similar features like the Wild Magic Sorcerer or Wild Magic Barbarian, where the effect is immediate, whether it's useful in the moment or not, and better than the Alchemist, where the possibilities of the roll just aren't all that great. Here we actually have some decently potent stuff, and because we can decide when to apply the effect, we can choose to keep this until it comes in handy. In some cases, we may find use for this immediately, such as boosting an ally's temporary hit points by a pretty good amount, as well as providing them movement and armor class boosts while they have those temporary hit points. So that could be right until you complete your next long rest. That's really quite strong, well worth an inspiration die, in my opinion. Others you're going to want to hang on to, and they're really like handy little spells. For example, if you roll a 4, you can use your action to allow an ally to teleport using their reaction, and you can teleport multiple creatures. That's actually quite a good option to have in your pocket, even if it's not going to come up right away. The most disappointing is likely Tale of the Renowned Duelist, where you use your action to make a melee spell attack that delivers 2 rolls of your inspiration die plus your charisma modifier. It sounds a lot to me like a weakened version of Inflict Wounds, though I suppose at least you can cast a spell with your bonus action on the same turn, but that I would say is the weakest one. Overall though, these are pretty good, and I think the random aspect isn't a deal breaker since you can use it when you want to, so you can hold it until it's useful. I would say they're a decent use of an inspiration die. Now you can only hold one of these at a time, so I would suggest doing so. I think they're worth the die. That said, I wouldn't use my inspiration dice exclusively for this or save them exclusively for this. Your best bet is going to likely be to mix it up. Some inspiration for this, some for regular inspiration. This could end up happening organically, as some of these you'll be holding on to until the circumstance comes up where they may be useful. And that could be until you complete your next short rest, and once you're a level 5 bard, you don't want the rest of your inspiration to go to waste, so give it out as regular inspiration. So let's go through the options quickly. One thing I'll mention beforehand, rather than repeating myself, is that if this is an option that you would be using in combat, ideally you'll use that action when you're concentrating on a spell, as your options while concentrating are always more limited, and they're often not all that great. So this gives you another option. So if we roll a 1, we get Tale of the Clever Animal. The target gets an automatic Bardic Inspiration die added to every Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma check. This one is very circumstantial, but it's also one you can use right away if you don't want to hold on to it. I'll note that Perception and Investigation checks will both apply here, and they're both reasonably common checks. This one isn't great though. If we roll a 2, we get Tale of the Renowned Duelist. As I mentioned, this one is my least favorite of the lot. Basically, a weakened version of Inflict Wounds. If we roll a 3, we get Tale of the Beloved Friends. This allows you to provide temporary hit points to 2 targets. Expect about 7-ish temps at 3rd level. Probably we'll get to 11 or 12 eventually. These last until your next long rest or until they're lost from damage, so I'd probably use them immediately unless your party already has a provider of temporary hit points, in which case you would use these as a replacement. If we roll a 4, we get Tale of the Runaway. This is the teleport I mentioned before. The range is 30 feet to a place the target can see. This one is circumstantial, but it is worth holding on to, as it's a pretty strong one, and teleporting other creatures is something normally not available until we get into level 3 spells, and teleporting multiple allies requires much higher level spells. I'm a fan of teleports, and I like this one quite a bit, despite the circumstantial nature. If we roll a 5, we get Tale of the Avenger. What we're going to do is we're going to select a creature, and then for the next minute, anytime they're hit with a melee attack, they're going to inflict damage on the attacker. That's force damage equal to your Bardic Inspiration die. So ideally here, what you would want to do is put it on something like the Raging Barbarian, who is going to get attacked a lot of times, potentially take a lot of hits, and thus deliver a lot of damage back. And so this is okay. It's not too bad if you have the right party member who does end up being the target of a lot of attacks. If we roll a 6, we get Tale of the Traveler. This is the one I mentioned with the temporary hit points, armor class boost, and movement increase. This one also scales much better than Tale of the Beloved Friends. We can eventually provide more than 20 temporary hit points with this, and +1 armor class is great, and 10 extra movement is great. So this one is really good, a bargain for a single inspiration die. If we roll a 7, we get Tale of the Beguiler. So we're into the stuff that actually has a level requirement, because this one isn't available until you get a D8 inspiration die, which means 5th level as a bard. This is a single target, they make a save, or nothing happens ability. That said, it's decent as it delivers damage and incapacitates the target until the end of its turn. An incapacitated target can't take actions or reactions, so you're basically stealing their turn, other than movement, for a single inspiration die. That's not bad at all. If we roll an 8, we get Tale of the Phantom. You turn a creature invisible until the end of its next turn, or until they hit a creature with an attack. The main use here is to boost a single attack, as you're granting advantage on the roll, and the creature will take extra necrotic damage equal to your bardic die, and they are frightened until the end of their next turn. There's no save against the frightened effect, so this one is pretty good, as we're improving the attack's chance to hit, the damage, and applying a condition, in addition to the temporary defensive boost the ally is going to have from being invisible. If we roll a 9, we get Tale of the Brute. So now we need a D10 to get this, which means Bard level 10. This is our first multiple target offensive option. We can choose which creatures are affected by this, so there's no friendly fire, but we can affect all enemies within 30 feet of us. So that's a really, really big area. All the creatures make a strength save, or they take thunder damage equal to 3 rolls of our Bardic Inspiration die, and they are knocked prone. On a successful save, they take half the damage, and naturally, they're not knocked prone. This is very reminiscent of the Destructive Wave spell, which is a 5th level spell. The damage is quite a bit less, like 16 on average instead of 35, but there's no friendly fire, and we aren't using a 5th level spell slot. We're using a single Bardic Inspiration die. That's still pretty good, in my opinion, as long as we're getting some use out of that prone condition. For just damage, it's not great unless we can hit a lot of enemies. If we roll a 10, we get Tail of the Dragon. This one is not nearly as good, as it's also area of effect damage, but this is a 30-foot cone, so way smaller. And it does have friendly fire, and it does fire damage, which is less reliable. The damage roll is a bit better as we're adding one more bardic die. This one is still better than using a cantrip, so it still might be something okay to do when you're concentrating on a spell, but it is definitely one of the weaker options. If we roll 11, we get Tail of the Angel. So now we need the D12, which means Bard level 15. With this, we heal some hit points, probably around 18, and we end one condition on the target, like we would with a lesser restoration spell. Probably this is worth a Bardic Inspiration die, but it is definitely one of the weaker options. And then if we roll a 12, we get Tail of the Mindbender. The target makes an intelligence save, and if they make it, nothing happens. If they fail, they take 3 Bardic dice of damage, so 3d12 at level 15, which isn't very much. But the bigger impact is they are stunned until the end of your next turn. So, like Stunning Fist, except you don't need to hit, and they make the worst save instead of the best save. So this one is okay, though you might expect something a little more dramatic at the end of the list, but instead we get one that's maybe a bit above average. So overall, these are decent. I mean, almost all of them, I would say, are well worth the inspiration die. So, a bit surprisingly, considering the random nature, I think this ability is not bad at all for a 3rd level feature. Of course, once we get Bardic Dice back at the short rest instead of long rest, at level 5, it does become quite a bit better. Then at level 6, we get Spirit Session. It reads, Spirits provide you with supernatural insights. You can conduct an hour-long ritual channeling spirits, which can be done during a short or long rest, using your spiritual focus. You can conduct the ritual with a number of willing creatures equal to your proficiency bonus, including yourself. At the end of the ritual, you temporarily learn one spell of your choice from any class. And that sounds really good, but the spell you choose must be of a level equal to the number of creatures that conducted the ritual or less, and the spell must be of a level you can cast, and it must be in the school of divination or necromancy. The chosen spell counts as a bard spell for you, but it doesn't count against the number of bard spells you know. Once you perform the ritual, you can't do so again until you start a long rest, and you know the chosen spell until you start a long rest. So thematically, I really get what they're going for here. This is kind of like the seance that you're going to be doing during your rest. But the limit of necromancy and divination, really in practice, is going to leave us with the ability to bring up a circumstantial spell with a short rest, which is probably divination, when we need it. And in terms of how mechanically advantageous that is, it's so-so. You're going to make use of it on occasion, and at worst, it's one extra spell known. But this one isn't really exciting at all, though. Finally, at level 14, we get Mystical Connection. This gives us a bit of control over the effect we roll with our Tales from Beyond ability. We roll 2 dice to determine the effect, and we can choose either result. And if we roll doubles, we can choose any effect. This one, it's okay. Though Tales from Beyond really isn't scaling all that dramatically for us, and it's a much better ability at level 5 than it's going to be at level 14. Though we are still going to be using this ability, and it's still worth those inspiration dice. So some control to avoid the less useful options is still welcome. Overall, this one, it's okay. So when I put it all together, honestly, I would argue this is one of the weaker bardic subclasses. There's some stinkers here. Spiritual Focus, that's a big disappointment. Tales from Beyond, though, is okay, and it presents a mechanic that I think really fits the concept they're going for. So I don't think it's terrible. You can certainly use this subclass and make a pretty decent character, though that is largely due to the fact that the Bard base class itself is a solid spellcaster and buffer. If you find it difficult to use your action effectively as a bard when you're concentrating on a spell, I think this is worth considering. But overall, in my opinion, this is College of Whispers adjacent as one of the weaker Bard options. So, that's the first of my Van Richten guide videos. I'll be going over all the character building options in the coming weeks, so I hope you'll join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.